Time usually moves forward, but what if it chose you to move backward? My name is Nolan Creek. I once believed time was a straight road, then the road bent. On my 90th birthday, the candles looked like tiny lighthouses, the room smelled of vanilla and warm coffee. My daughter, Maris Creek, laughed and told me to make a wish. I did. I wished for one more clear morning. The next morning came, and something else came with it. My hands looked less spotted. My knees hurt a little less. I thought it was the light, or my mood. Then I found my old navy sweater in the closet, and it fit better. At 91, I went back to the same clinic where I had spent half my life fixing broken habits. Dr. Hazel Vaughn checked my pulse and frowned in a polite way. She asked me to stand and to walk. I walked, steady. She asked my age. I said 91. She blinked, then wrote it down. At home I opened a photo album. In the picture from last year my jaw looked softer now. My eyes looked brighter. Not younger in spirit, younger in bone and skin. People said, "You look good for your age." I stopped correcting them. Correction felt useless. Every year after that, my body moved one step back along its own map. My hair darkened in small islands. My hearing sharpened. I tasted salt again. I smelled rain before it fell. The strange part was not the mirror. The strange part was the calendar. Friends from my chess club began to fade from the schedule. Their seats stayed empty. I did not use harsh words for it. I simply said they were no longer coming. I kept showing up anyway, because routine felt like a railing on a steep stair. At 89, then 88, I bought new shoes. I learned the latest phone again. I watched Maris become the grown-up in the room. Her voice carried bills and plans. She called me Dad, but she also called me honey sometimes, the way I once called her when she scraped a knee. I tried to joke about it. The jokes landed like coins on a soft pillow. Quiet. One night I sat on the porch and listened to crickets. I realized the hard challenge was not aging backward. The hard challenge was staying present while the world moved forward. Because the future was opening like a huge door. And I had forgotten how to want to walk through it. At 87 on paper, I looked like a miracle on camera. The local news wanted a segment. Maris said no. She feared the circus. I agreed, but not only for privacy. I feared the story would own me. I needed to own it first. Dr. Vaughn called it a reversal pattern. She said she had no neat label. She asked about my sleep, my diet, my stress. I told her the truth. I slept like a cautious cat. I ate like a widower who learned to cook late. My stress was the quiet kind, the kind that sits beside you and watches. She suggested journals. She suggested sunlight. She suggested friends. I wrote in a notebook with thick paper. I wrote short lines. I am here. I am changing. I am not a rumor. Each week I measured my grip strength. Each month I checked my old scars. They softened. They faded. It was like my body was untying knots it had carried for decades. Still, my mind did not rewind. My memories stayed heavy and complete. I remembered the year my wife, Tessa Creek, stopped laughing at my bad puns. I remembered the day she left the house for the last time. I do not name that day with a dark word. I simply remember the empty mug on the sink. The coat still on the hook. The silence that followed me room to room. When my body grew younger, that silence did not shrink. It stayed the same size. At 85 in my bones, I tried dating again. I used a simple app, because Maris set it up. I met a woman named June Callow. She had kind eyes and a loud laugh. She liked jazz and long walks. We talked over pancakes. We talked about books. We talked about ordinary things, and that felt rare. June said, "You are different. You listen like someone who has seen storms." I said, "I have." I also said, I am learning to see sunshine again. She reached across the table and touched my hand. It was gentle. It was safe. After that morning, I felt a flicker in my chest. Not pain. Something like a pilot light. I went home and opened my notebook. I wrote, I might want things again. Then I paused, because wanting felt risky. Wanting meant planning. Planning meant believing in time. And time had become a trickster that wore my face. By the time my driver license said 80, my reflection suggested 65. The clerk at the pharmacy stared. At the bank, a young teller asked for extra ID. Her badge said Kira Sloan. Her smile was professional, but uncertain. I showed my papers. I answered the same questions. I learned to carry patience in my pocket. Maris hired a lawyer named Grant Hollis. Grant wore bright socks and calm opinions. He said the system loves straight lines. Your life is a curve. We will translate the curve into forms. Translate was the right word. It felt like my body spoke a new language each year. At home, I made lists of what I could do again. Ride a bike. Climb stairs without gripping the rail. Play the old guitar that had been silent since my 40s. I tuned it, slowly. My fingers were clumsy, then less clumsy. Music returned, not as a grand concert, but as a simple room with light in it. June Callow kept visiting. We walked in the park. We watched dogs chase sticks. She asked, do you ever feel like you are cheating the clock? I said, the clock is cheating me too. It is taking my friends, and it is giving me strange mornings. She nodded, like she understood without solving it. One afternoon she brought a small kite. A red kite with a long tail. She said, I miss doing silly things. I miss wind. We went to an open field. The sky was wide and pale. I ran, and the kite rose. My lungs did not burn the way they used to. My legs moved with an old memory of speed. Children watched and smiled. A little boy shouted, higher. I pulled the string and laughed. The laugh surprised me. It sounded younger than my thoughts. June laughed too. She said, there it is. That night I dreamed of a hallway with many doors. Behind each door was a version of me. Some were tired. Some were sharp. Some were lonely. One was holding a sketchbook. I woke up with the image of that sketchbook, and I could not shake it. I had not drawn since high school. I had told myself art was for other people. In the kitchen I found a pencil. I found paper. I drew the kite, crooked and simple. Then I drew the field. Then I drew June, but I made her smile too big. I kept drawing anyway. I wrote in my notebook, I am building new rooms inside my day. Dreaming, I realized, was not a talent. It was a muscle. And my dream muscle had been asleep for a long time. When my body crossed into its late 50s, people began to treat me like a peer, not an elder. Strangers called me sir, but not in the soft way they use with old men. They called me sir like I might argue back. I did argue back sometimes. Not with anger. With curiosity. I joined a community workshop downtown. It smelled of sawdust and blue. The sign said Maker's Night. A woman named Piper Lane ran the place. She wore safety glasses like jewelry. She asked, what do you want to build? I said, I used to repair things. I never built things for joy. Piper handed me a block of wood. She said, start with a simple box. A box can hold anything, even a new idea. I sanded the edges. I learned to measure twice. I watched younger people struggle with patience. Some were 25, some were 40. They all wanted results fast. I understood them. I had spent decades wanting results from life. Then life changed the rules. A teenager named Miles Arden asked my advice on a chair design. He said, you talk like my grandpa, but you look like my uncle. I smiled. I said, then take the best of both. Build sturdy. Leave room to move. Miles laughed and did it. His chair did not wobble. One night Piper asked me to lead a short class. I hesitated. Leading meant being seen. Being seen meant questions. June said, let them wonder. Wonder is kinder than gossip. So I led the class. I taught people how to fix a loose hinge, how to patch a cracked frame, how to respect a tool. Afterward, a woman named Sienna Brooks thanked me. She said, I needed a win this week. I walked home feeling taller. Later, at my apartment, Maris called. She sounded tired. She said, Dad, I do not know how to plan around you. I knew what she meant. She was aging forward. I was sliding back. Our timelines were crossing like trains at night. I told her, plan around love. The rest is paperwork. She went quiet, then laughed softly. She said, you always find the simple sentence. I hung up and stared at the ceiling. Dreaming was returning, but it came with a second lesson. You cannot dream alone. Dreams need witnesses. They need people who say, yes, I see you. And I had started to gather those people again. At 53 in my shoulders, I felt spring in my step. At 53 in my memories, I felt winter too. June Callow was 64. She joked that she was dating a man who was changing seasons the wrong way. I joked back, and our jokes finally sounded like music, not like coins on a pillow. We went to a small concert by the river. A saxophone played slow notes. The water carried lights like ribbons. June leaned into me. She said, promise you will not disappear into your mystery. I said, I will not. I will stay reachable. Still, there were nights when fear visited. Not fear of an ending word. Fear of separation by time. If my body kept moving younger, what would happen when I looked 30 and she looked 70? Would people stare? Would they assume the wrong story? Would they judge us with quick eyes? June said, let them. We know our story. She was braver than I was. At the maker's workshop, Piper offered me a part-time job. She said, you are good with people. You are calm. I had been retired for years. Retirement had once felt like a slow fade. Now it felt like an old coat that did not fit. I took the job. I arrived early. I swept floors. I organized screws by size. I loved the order of small things. One afternoon Miles Arden brought in a broken drone. He looked upset. I said, tell me what happened. He said, it crashed. Everyone laughed. I felt small. I told him, you are not small. You are learning in public. That is hard. We fixed the drone. We tested it outside. It lifted, steady. Miles grinned. Later he said, do you ever wish you could restart everything? I said, sometimes. Then I said, restarting is not the point. Choosing is the point. That answer surprised me. It sounded like a future, not a regret. At home I filled my notebook with sketches. Boxes. Chairs. Kites. Faces. Then, for the first time in decades, I wrote a plan. I wrote, build a small studio. Teach repair skills. Make it welcoming. Make it patient. I imagined a sign. Creek Repair and Maker Lab. The idea felt bold, because boldness is a kind of youth. Maris visited on Sunday. She looked at my sketches and shook her head. She said, Dad, you look younger than me in photos now. It is weird. I said, it is. But I want you to be proud, not confused. She touched my cheek. Her eyes were wet, but she smiled. She said, I am proud. I just need time to adjust. I wanted to tell her I would give her time. Then I remembered I did not control time anymore. So I gave her something else. I gave her honesty. I said, I am scared too. But I am also excited. I feel like the world is handing me blank pages. She nodded. She said, then write well. And I decided that I would. The year my body settled into its mid-40s, my mind felt like an attic with open windows. Air moved through old boxes. Dust lifted. Ideas drifted down like clean sheets. With Grant Hollis handling forms and Maris helping with numbers, I rented a narrow storefront. It had a big front window and a squeaky door. It smelled like paint and possibility. Piper Lane helped me set up benches. Miles Arden installed lights. June Callow brought plants. We hung a simple sign. Creek Lab. Repair. Make. Learn. On opening day, I expected no one. Then people came. A college student named Daria Wynn brought a cracked suitcase. A tired nurse named Brooke Ellison brought a lamp that would not turn on. A dad named Ethan Rowe brought a toy robot with a loose arm. I fixed what I could. I showed them how. I let them hold the tools. Each small repair felt like a quiet promise. Things can return. Things can work again. Someone filmed a short clip and posted it online. The clip showed my hands, steady, teaching, patient. Comments appeared. People wrote, I needed this energy. People wrote, this is wholesome. Wholesome was a word I had never tried to be. I liked it. More people came the next week. I started a free Saturday class for teens. I called it the Second Chance Club. Not for people, for objects. But the kids understood the other meaning too. One teen, Lila Hart, said, I feel like I mess up everything. I handed her a broken clock. I said, open it. Look inside. Find the real problem. It is rarely the loudest part. She opened it. Her face changed. She saw gears. She saw patterns. She smiled. June watched from the corner, proud. Later she said, you are dreaming out loud now. I said, I am. It is scary. She said, good. Scary means it matters. At night I sometimes stood in the dark shop and listened to the quiet hum of the refrigerator in the back. I thought about Tessa, my late partner in laughter. I thought about how she loved old radios. I placed one of her radios on a shelf, cleaned, polished, working. It felt like a respectful hello. I did not cling to the past. I simply let it sit beside the present. Maris visited again. She walked around the shop and touched the workbench. She said, Dad, this is you. This is the best version. I said, I do not know which version I am anymore. She said, you are the one who shows up. That is enough. Outside, the city lights made the street look like a river of stars. I locked the door and held June's hand. For the first time since my 90th birthday, I felt a clean kind of hunger. Not for more time. For more meaning. When my face reached the edge of 39, the world started to mislabel me. At a cafe, the barista asked if Maris was my sister. Maris laughed, but her eyes looked tired. At the shop, new customers called me young man. They asked what college I went to. I told them, I went to the College of Patience. They did not always get the joke. Grant Hollis warned me about more paperwork. He said, you will have to prove yourself in strange ways. I said, I have been proving myself my whole life. But this was different. This was proving my own name belonged to my own face. June Callow turned 68. She wore her years with grace, like a soft scarf. Still, I saw the glances when we held hands in public. I saw the quick assumptions. I wanted to protect her from that. She said, do not protect me by hiding. So we did not hide. We also did not perform. We lived. We ate soup. We went to museums. We sat on benches. One evening June brought a photo of herself at 20. She placed it on the table. She said, "I used to dream big. Then life got loud, and I started dreaming small." I looked at her photo and felt something twist inside me. Not jealousy. Not regret. Recognition. I said, "I stopped dreaming at all for a while." She asked, "Why?" I said, "Because dreaming felt like tempting fate. Because wanting felt like inviting loss." She nodded slowly. She said, "You are not wrong to be careful. But you are wrong to stay closed." That night we talked for hours. We talked about what love looks like when time plays tricks. June said, "Love can change shape without breaking." I said, "Are you saying goodbye?" She smiled. She said, "I am saying we can be many things. Partners, friends, teachers, witnesses." The word witness landed softly. It felt true. In the weeks that followed, we shifted. We held hands less. We held space more. She became my steady anchor, and I became her bright project. People sometimes asked if she was my aunt. She rolled her eyes and said, "He is my favorite human." At the shop, Lila Hart asked me to sign her application for a design program. I read her essay. It was honest. It was brave. It was full of future. I signed it and felt proud, as if her dream was my own small branch on the same tree. That weekend I drove to the ocean alone. I watched waves fold and unfold. I thought about time again. Time was not a straight road. It was water. It moved. It returned. It changed shapes. I opened my notebook and wrote a new sentence. I wrote, "I will not live like a visitor. I will live like a builder." Then I wrote, "I will dream even if it scares me." And when I closed the notebook, the sky looked wider than before. At 29 in my bones, my voice still carried decades. People heard it and tilted their heads. They tried to place me on a timeline. I let them fail. The shop grew busy. I hired Miles Arden as an assistant. He was now in college, and he worked evenings. Piper Lane stayed a partner in spirit. Maris handled taxes inside a lot. June Callow visited twice a week, always with a new book. She said, "Keep feeding your mind." I did. I enrolled in a night class at the community college. Design basics. Sketching. Materials. My teacher was a sharp woman named Alana Frost. She wore bright lipstick and spoke in clean steps. She said, "Your lines show experience. Your imagination is catching up." That sentence hit me like a bell. Experience. Imagination. Catching up. After class, other students invited me to a diner. They were 20, 21, full of buzzing plans. They talked about careers and moving to new cities. They complained about small problems. I did not mock them. I remembered being that age and thinking small problems were huge. I listened. Then I offered one calm thought when asked. A student named Jordan Pike said, "You are weirdly steady." I said, "I had a head start on being unsteady." They laughed. I laughed too. Later, walking home, I realized something simple. I could belong here. Not as a trick. Not as a joke. As a person. Still, the hardest part remained. Dreaming. Dreaming was not just a plan on paper. It was a feeling in the chest. I wanted to feel it without flinching. So I tried small dreams first. I dreamed of taking a train across the country. I dreamed of learning Spanish well enough to read a poem. I dreamed of building a radio like Tessa used to love. I shared those dreams with June. She nodded and said, "Pick one. Commit." I picked the train. Maris worried, but she helped. She booked tickets. She wrote a list of safety tips. Grant Hollis wrote a letter explaining my situation, in case anyone questioned my age. On the day I left, June hugged me for a long time. She said, "Bring me a story." I said, "I always do." The train rolled out at dawn. The city shrank. Fields opened. Mountains rose. I watched strangers read, sleep, talk. I felt like a young man and an old man at once. In the dining car, I met a veteran teacher named Calvin Moore. He asked what I did. I said, "I fix things. I teach people to fix things." Calvin said, "That is a good life." I looked out at the passing trees and felt a spark. For the first time, dreaming did not feel like tempting fate. It felt like meeting it halfway, with open hands. The years kept sliding. 25. 23. 21. My face smoothed. My shoulders narrowed. My energy rose like a sunrise that refused to set. But my mind stayed full grown. It was a library inside a young frame. That mismatch became the new challenge. At 20, I could not rent a car without questions. I could not walk into some meetings without being underestimated. At 19, people spoke to Maris instead of me. They said, "Does he need help?" Maris would answer, "He needs respect." Then she would look at me, apologetic. I told her, "It is okay. I understand their confusion. I am confused too." At the shop, customers began to assume Miles Arden was the owner. Miles corrected them every time. He said, "Nolan built this place. Nolan taught me." That loyalty warmed me. It also reminded me that I could not control every perception. I could only control my choices. June Callow's hair turned more silver. She moved slower now. Yet her eyes stayed bright. She said, "You are becoming a paradox with sneakers." I said, "You are becoming a lighthouse with books." We laughed. One night, after closing, I sat with Maris at the workbench. I said, "We need a plan for when I look too young to run my own life." Maris swallowed. She said, "I have been thinking about that too." Grant Hollis helped us set up a legal trust for the shop. Miles would manage day to day. Maris would have oversight. And I would have a voice, as long as I could speak it. But the real plan was not legal. It was emotional. I began recording messages. Short ones. Calm ones. I recorded how I loved the smell of sawdust. How June's laugh sounded like summer. I recorded the lesson about fixing hinges. Measure twice. Breathe. Try again. I recorded the lesson about dreaming. Start small. Share it. Keep going. I put the recordings on a drive labeled for Nolan later. Some nights I feared forgetting. Not because my mind was failing, but because my future body might not hold my past. Dr. Vaughn said, "Memory is complicated. But stories can be anchors." So I wrote stories too. One long story, and many short ones. I wrote about Tessa and the radio. I wrote about the kite. I wrote about the first day at the shop. I wrote about the train and the wide sky. Then I wrote one final instruction to myself. I wrote, "When you are young again, do not rush. Do not try to be old. Be present. Be kind." June read that line and wiped her eyes. She said, "You are still teaching." I said, "I think that is my job now." Outside, the city hummed. Inside, the workbench held our quiet future. And for the first time, I did not fear the next step backward. I felt ready to carry my dreams forward, even if my body moved the other way. Eventually the mirror showed a boy. 12. Then 11. Then 10. My voice rose, lighter. My hands grew smaller. My shoes shrank. My mind stayed a calm ocean, but the world treated me like a puddle. Maris became my guardian on paper. She hated that word, but she did it with love. Miles Arden ran the shop with steady hands. Piper Lane kept the community nights alive. June Callow sat with me and read aloud, her finger guiding the lines when my eyes got tired. At 10, I went to school again. I carried a backpack that felt huge. The other kids talked fast and changed friends by lunchtime. I watched and learned. I did not try to be their teacher. I tried to be their teammate. A boy named Theo Mercer asked why I was so polite. I said, "My mom raised me well." It was a simple answer, and it was also true. Maris packed my lunch. She wrote notes on napkins. Little jokes. Little hearts. I had been her father. Now she was my safe place. The circle was strange, but it was gentle. On weekends, I visited the shop. I sat at my old workbench on a tall stool. Miles would hand me small tasks. Sorting screws. Testing batteries. Drawing labels. Customers smiled at me. Some recognized my eyes and looked surprised. I just smiled back. I did not need to explain. Not anymore. One afternoon June brought the red kite again. It was a little frayed, but it still wanted the sky. We went to the same open field. The wind came steady. I ran, and the kite rose, and I laughed, loud and clear. In that moment, I understood the final lesson. Dreaming is easier when you are young, because the world has not trained you to shrink. But dreaming is deeper when you remember what it feels like to shrink, and you choose to expand anyway. I sat in the grass and watched the kite dance. I felt my whole life behind me, like a long trail of footprints. I also felt a whole life ahead, like fresh snow. June sat beside me and said, "What do you want now, Nolan?" I thought of my recordings. I thought of my notebook. I thought of the shop full of second chances. I said, "I want to keep building. Maybe not with tools at first. Maybe with words. Maybe with kindness." Maris arrived with a thermos of cocoa. She sat with us and watched the sky. She said, "You okay, kiddo?" I said, "I am." And I meant it. Because the hardest part had not been changing. It had been trusting joy again. Now joy was simple. Wind. Family. A kite. A future that did not demand proof. And as the kite tugged the string, I made a wish that did not fight time. I wished to keep dreaming, no matter what shape tomorrow chose.